Hello friends, I'm Buddy here at Haas of Props, and as you may know, I made Sauron and Gandalf the White Staff a while ago, so naturally I needed to make Gandalf the Grey Staff. We got to see Sir Ian McKellen wield this through the Fellowship of the Ring, and we also saw the staff's predecessor version in the Hobbit films. For this staff, I wanted to use a different technique than 3D printing it like I did the other two I just mentioned. This time I wanted to sculpt it, so I used a dowel as my base and built up the texture with foam clay. I also wanted to add some extra features, so I've included Gandalf's pipe, which I sculpted off of the one from Weta, and the nail he uses to clean the pipe. I'll include a link to the template and the files in the below description in case you want to build one, but in the meantime, let's get started. I'm using an 1.5" diameter dowel that is 6 feet in length. Now, to this dowel, I carve away some areas so it won't look so linear and look more like the correct staff shape. I've included the shape of the dowel and the shape of the staff together in the template so you can see where to trim away and where we will need to build up with foam. Now, I'm using foam clay for this because I can sculpt it directly onto the dowel without needing any glues or adhesives. The clay is great because it is super pliable, but it can get a little sticky, so make sure you are wearing or working on anything you don't mind getting dirty. To help shape the foam and help it adhere, I'm using a little bit of water. I'll apply a little bit of the clay to the dowel, dip my finger in water, and use the water to blend the edges so it'll stick nicely to the wood. Now, I'm not looking to get a super smooth, clean sculpt, so you'll notice that as I apply the clay, I'm creating an uneven linear pattern with it. This unevenness and the edges will create a bark/wood texture very similar to the original staff. Where the staff needs to be bulked up to fit the template, I add a big glob of clay and blend it into the rest. Now, on the staff there are a few spots where it looks like Weta wanted it to look like limbs were broken off of the piece of wood the OG staff was made of. In these spots, there's an edge where the inner wood can be seen, and for these areas I'm creating a ring of clay on top of the original clay, which I let cure until it was completely dry. Then, using water in my finger, I blend the outer edge of the ring into the white foam and only slightly blend the inner edge. This way, it'll create the appearance of a deeper pocket. Now, I'm using 2 colors of foam clay because I ran out of the white and I had a lot of black still in the shop, but it turned out to be helpful so I could see the newly added details better. I added 4 of these pockets around the length of the staff. You can add as many as you like, but just try and scatter them sporadically around so they look more natural and not planned. Then came time to sculpt the top. Here I added a glob of clay, and on this glob I'll build up more root knot, which is at the end. I initially tried to build the root's finger appendages by using wire as the structure and added foam clay onto that, but that turned out to be an epic fail because the clay was so soft it would sag and droop under its own weight before it dried, making a very sad looking mess. So I removed all that mess and decided to add some 10mm foam strips to the end. This, as you'll see in a few, worked out great. To attach them, I used CA glue and ended up gluing about 6 of them to the end. While I continue to attach those, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already. It's completely free to you and will help my channel grow. Plus, if you click the notification bell, you can customize your notifications so you'll never miss out when a new video is released. Thank you for your support, and let's get back to it. With the strips glued into place, I blended them into the base with some foam clay. At this point, I also used the clay to add 3 little nubs onto the top as well to create some variation in length. And as you can see, the black clay can get pretty messy when using the water, but the water really helps hold the clay together because it does shrink slightly as it dries, and if not attached properly, the edges could peel away. Then I let that dry overnight and it cured completely, so I was able to use my Dremel with a sanding drum and round over the sharp edges on the 10mm foam strips. I also used the Dremel to create some unevenness in the strips so they would look more natural and not as rectangular. And since I had it out, I went ahead and carved some wood grain texture into the root end of the staff. You can see how the carved texture really is visible with the black clay. That is definitely a plus about using the black over the white. I still wasn't totally happy about the finger shapes at the end. They still looked too regular, so I added some small balls of clay at their ends and blended these down their length. Then each ball got a small divot pushed into the top end, and the sides pulled up slightly to create small pockets. Now I was getting happy with the irregularity of the look. I let that dry and used the Dremel again to carve texture into the added clay on the fingers. By keeping the mark making sporadic and uneven, it allowed each finger to take on its own characteristics and look random. With the root end in a place that I was very happy with, I proceeded to carve texture into the length of the staff. I didn't go super heavy with it, I just wanted to add a hint of a wood grain, because remember, I sculpted and pulled the foam when applying it to create the texture. The Dremel was just to accentuate it. Now, around the pockets, I had the marks follow the outer curve of the pocket, the same way real wood would behave in nature. Then, using this small metal sanding tip on the Dremel, I carve a little into the pockets made at the ends of the root fingers. This created some rough texture and unevenness on a smaller scale than I would have been able to achieve with the sculpting clay. Plus, it allowed me to carve an edge around the divot in order to create the illusion of multiple layers of wood. The same tip I used on the inner surfaces of the pockets on the staff length. The pointed tip, as I said, allows for carving an edge to create the illusion of multiple layers, and by using the very tip and creating lots of small dots in the foam, you can create a texture that resembles wood which is starting to age and decay, and even looks like it's been damaged by insects, just the way these areas on a real piece of wood would naturally look. Alright, so I'm going to switch gears for a few and focus on the pipe and nail for a bit. I began removing the 3D printer lines by sanding the pieces with some 220 grit sandpaper. Then I switched to 400 grit and sand the pieces again. The 220 removed a lot of the material and the 400 will smooth everything off. To attach the pipe stem to the bowl, I'm using some of the CA glue. The bowl has a little ledge for the stem to sit on, but the key was to make sure the stem was in a straight line with the bowl. Here it is with the bowl attached, and at this point we can begin to do a little more cleanup to the pipe, so we'll end up with the finished piece looking like well-polished wood. First, I want to fill in the seam between the stem and the bowl, and to do this I'm going to apply some glazing and spot putty. I smear a generous amount onto the seam with a palette knife. It might look like a lot, but it will shrink as it dries, and by having excess, it's less likely the seam will open back up. Here's the nail, and as you can see, it sanded pretty smooth, but the end of the print, which was touching the print bed, had some roughness, so I applied a layer of the putty onto it just to fill in the surface. Once the putty cured, which only took about 30 minutes, I used the 400 grit sandpaper to smooth down the roughness and make it even with the surface. Next, I used a mixture of putty and acetone on the entire piece. This will fill in any remaining print layer lines and help us get the polished wood look. Then once that cured, the pieces could be sanded again with the 400 grit. This will just even off the surface and remove brush marks. The pieces are pretty smooth, but let's take them over the top. To do that, I spray mine with a 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. I know it may seem like a lot of work to finish off the prints, but actually it's really easy and the final results are unbelievable. Once the primer is dry, I sand again with the 400 grit. And it's difficult to see in this video, but when you do it, you'll notice that the primer begins to take on a shine, and in this case, that shine means smooth. Now back to the staff. For right now, ignore the paint on the pipe, we'll talk about that in a minute. I take the pipe and do a test fit where I want it to sit and be held in place. And then using some of the foam clay, I add on a loop which will hold the pipe in place when it dries. It will shrink as it dries, so make sure to make it big enough. And once I had the placement and size where I wanted them, I remove the pipe and blend the clay into the previous foam layers. And the exact same process can be used on the reverse side to hold the nail. Once all the clay is dry, the entire staff can be sprayed with some Plasti Dip. This will seal the foam and provide a flexible surface which is perfect to receive acrylic paint. And for a project like this, I'll give it 2 even coats to make sure there is complete coverage and a decent layer. After which I let the plasti dip cure overnight before continuing, and with it dry I base the staff with some raw sienna. Yes, it's very light and yellow, but once we build up some glazed wash layers, it'll take on the correct wood tone. For the next layer, I make a wash with some Venetian red and some burnt umber. This will tone down the yellow a little and begin to take us to more of a wood color. And by using washes like this, each layer we add will work with the previous layer, allowing you to create realistic depth in the paint job. When that is dry, I apply a burnt umber wash. The wash will sink into the sculpted and carved textures, and I lightly dab spots with a paper towel. This will break up the application and create randomness in the paint job. And I forgot to turn on one of my shop lights, which is why the color looks a little funky here. While the burnt umber wash is still a little damp, I brushed on a generous layer of black wash, then wipe the staff with a paper towel. When wiping, I pull the length of the staff. This will create streaks resembling a wood texture, and some of the wash will remain in the creases, creating more depth in the sculpt. While those washes dry, I base the pipe in a burnt umber. And the nail gets based with a mixture of burnt umber and some black. Then using the raw umber, I dry brush some wood grain lines onto the pipe with a thick bristle brush. And the raw umber can be used on the nail to create some grime and rust. Once the pipe was dry, I used the black wash on it and used the paper towel dabbing to create randomness and blend brush marks. Once completely dry, the pipe can be dusted with a clear gloss coat. By dusted, I mean a very light spray where the can is held about a foot away from the piece and the nozzle is just lightly touched to create a fine mist. We want the pipe to have a slight shine like polished wood, but not too shiny or it'll look lacquered. Now with the staff, the paint job is looking a little flat and dull, but that'll change by just adding a little bit of gloss medium to the surface. I thin it with a little water and apply it to the staff following the wood texture. Yes, it looks white and creamy, but when it dries, it will turn clear. Once that is dry, I apply some thinned black to the pockets. I don't completely fill them in, instead I apply it randomly. This will begin to make these areas look a little different from the rest of the staff, creating a more natural look. While the black is still wet, I blend in some of the raw sienna mixed with a little bit of white. Again, this will just create some natural randomness in the paint job. And once everything is completely dry, the pipe can be slid into its loop so that it wraps around the staff and the bowl nests in the root ball at the top. And the nail can be slid into its loop on the reverse side like so. And like that, Gandalf the Grey staff is complete. You can see how the gloss clear coat is really making those layers of washes really pop, and how each layer works with the others to create a very natural and dynamic staff which looks like a piece of wood and not foam. By adding the pockets, not only because the OG prop had them, but you can see how having the depth difference and the change in both textures and paint finishes is adding to making this staff look authentic and natural. And by adding the pipe and the nail, it gives more of Gandalf's personality to the staff, but it also gives the piece so much more character itself. I can see why the designers at Weta incorporated these little pieces into their props. It gives them a history and relevance in both the world and the character. Well, that's it, my friends. I hope you found this video both enjoyable and informative. If you have any questions at all, feel free to ask. I'm only too happy to answer them. Plus, if you want to make a staff, I've included a link to the staff template and the files for the pipe and nail. Again, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and family, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at Haas of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.